What does the first commandment, which says, "You shall have no other gods before me," actually mean? Hey, everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. And like all the commandments and really the rest of the Bible, the first commandment will have been reinterpreted over the centuries so that it could continue to remain relevant to the communities that used it, so it could continue to be meaningful and useful to them. But let's talk about what it probably originally referred to. Here's the Hebrew of the first 4 verses of Exodus 20, which is where we find the beginning of the 10 Commandments. And our clause is in the red box. And it reads in Hebrew, Lo yechye lecha Elohim acherim al panai. And a very wooden translation of this would be, there shall not be to you other gods in front of my face. And so the most natural sense of the Hebrew, and the sense that most scholars agree was probably initially intended and initially understood by the earliest audiences, would have been a spatial one. So the idea would be, there will be no other gods in front of my face or in my presence. And this would refer to the Holy of Holies in the temple, where a divine image would have manifested God's presence. And so to have other gods al panai, in front of my face, would mean to have other divine images in that same space. And we actually have an example of a divine image that would have been understood to manifest Adonai's presence in a Holy of Holies in a Judahite temple. That is the Temple of Arad, which was discovered in the southern desert, which would have been under the authority of the central Jerusalem priesthood. And so looking at this photo and seeing the divine image there, imagine other divine images being placed in this room. That's what this passage is prohibiting. And it's also important to note that that means the passage is using the word Elohim in an unironic and non-polemical way to refer to divine images. They were conceptualized as divine, as gods in the pre-exilic period, just like the divine image that represented Adonai was. And this means that this passage probably comes from the pre-exilic period, when there were temples in operation, when there were divine images that represented Adonai. And we kind of have a story that talks about Adonai's jealousy when it comes to sacred space in 1 Samuel 5, where the Ark of the Covenant is represented as a kind of divine image, and the Philistines abscond with it and place it in one of their own temples next to the divine image that represented Dagon, which the narrative refers to as the god Dagon. And what happens? The divine image that represents Adonai defeats the divine image that represents Dagon, because even in someone else's temple, Adonai is very jealous of their sacred space and will not share it with others. Now, once the temple was destroyed, this would have to be reinterpreted, because we no longer have that sacred space, and they're renegotiating their understanding of what a divine image is and how God's presence could be manifested. And so we no longer think of the gods as a reference to divine images. Now they're just referring to the gods in general, and before my face must be reinterpreted as well. And the next step was probably to interpret it hierarchically. So it's not in front of my presence so much as it is before me in importance. Nobody takes precedence over me. I come first. However, in the exilic and post-exilic period, there's also an awful lot of rhetoric about how the Israelites only have allegiance to one God and to no other gods. And so it's not just no other gods before me, it's no other gods at all besides me. And that is not actually what the Hebrew of Exodus 20 verse 3 is saying. There are other ways to say that in Hebrew, but that other rhetoric says that. And so that would influence how this is interpreted. And so we would go from no other divine images in front of my divine image to no other deities in front of me to no other deities at all besides me. That's probably how the interpretation of this passage evolved. But its earliest author and its earliest audiences almost certainly would have understood it to refer to a prohibition on bringing other divine images into the Holy of Holies and setting them up in front of or beside or next to the divine image that represented Adonai, the God of Israel. And that's what it probably originally meant to say, "You shall have no other gods before me." And sugar, the fit for this video is Rogue.